not the Western powers, but the Sabbateans who are above and behind the Western powers. I'm talking about the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and all these kind of people.
So these black screens are part of the same financial system that was created by Bretton Woods.
Well, it's the current version. It's the ultimate, high-tech computer network where the money is all supposedly hidden.
Wouldn't there be some entity like the
in charge at the top, and there was no agreement? Different groups started creating, ridiculous numbers. I've heard that there's now quintillions of dollars that they've tried to put into the system.
I've heard that as well.
33 orders of magnitude more than there is real world economy, okay? So it's broken. The system has mathematically malfunctioned at the highest level.
Now, one of the things that I've heard, this is an important point, some of the insider stuff I've heard, and I've never said this publicly before, but it's my understanding that as a result of Bretton Woods, central banks were forbidden from directly trading with one another. They had to have civilian intermediaries who actually were the bond holders, who actually kept the equity in their own private accounts. But part of Bretton Woods was that these people were supposed to deposit like 80% of the yield as this money was created out of thin air into humanitarian relief programs. Would you agree with that?
I've heard something along those lines, and I know at least a couple of people who do this trading between governments. Right. One of like 20 people at the BIS who are authorized to do this stuff.
Right.
Talk directly to them. But yeah, the point is that, and here's the problem is that if they open these screens and we have the access codes now, they realize that the money wasn't used mostly for humanitarian purposes. It was stolen and used for military-industrial purposes. So
when you say open the black screens, is that the equivalent of what you were calling the Book of Maklumat that came from Suharto in Indonesia?
Well, the Book of Maklumat is one of several, physical account entries that would allow people to open up this can of worms and prove that money was stolen.
Is there one copy of it only, or is...
No, there are many copies hidden all over the place now, of course, because it's such a sensitive issue.
Wow.
We don't want to have... but essentially...
But who has the jurisdiction to go after these guys? That's one of the problems.
That's the problem. We are in kind of uncharted territory because we don't have the structures right now. The United Nations is run by a bunch of gangsters. A lot of the world leaders have been bribed and blackmailed into obeying these people. Okay, so what's happening is we're entering a kind of a vacuum. And we need to set up new structures, new systems, a new way of running the planet. Now,
but if the euro and the dollar become bankrupt, people are going to be really pissed, and those changes could happen pretty quickly, right?
Well, the euro is already bankrupt because you can see the IMF, which is supposedly the highest financial body on earth, is saying they don't have any money. Now when Russia went bankrupt, it was the IMF that bailed them out, and now the so-called IMF doesn't have money. That's because they don't have a legal mandate. It expired in 1994. Okay? They're just a bunch of people claiming to have the right. No one gave it to them.
And that means that these non-aligned nations you're referring to, they're not accepting the bubble money that's being created in the computers anymore? They're not accepting that equity?
It's all been blacklisted. It's kept out of the system. That's why the dollar you haven't had hyperinflation in the United States, is because that money is not being put into the system. Otherwise, all these numbers announced by the Fed, if you do the math, you'd say, well, why isn't there hyperinflation? There should be, but there isn't. Because it's not being allowed into the system. So it is a mess, but here's the real point, okay, is that the creation of money, in a way, it's the process of deciding what we as a species do in the future. Okay?
Yeah.
And it's been controlled by religious fanatics who wanted to carry out Old Testament prophecies, which is really wacko, but it's kind of mind-boggling, all right? But most of us ordinary humans like any Miss America candidate, or pretty well any guy you pick off the street would say, well, end poverty, you know, stop environmental destruction, maybe make everyone rich and happy, you know, stuff like that. I mean, it's not rocket science. That what we want in the future is not what the current set of leaders has in mind.
Yeah,
they want World War III and killing 4 billion people and a rule of elite over a slave population. Well, we don't want that. But
right, you're actually saying that I mean, because we've revealed something in this interview that I've never heard you say publicly before, and that is that the amount of gold that's here, it's like all of the confiscating of the Roman Empire that pulled it out of these ancient places where it already was, that it all somehow made its way over to China because of silk trading and this and that, and opium.
Asia. Spice,
okay.
Silk, ceramics.
Right. So there's this massive amount of gold that could put us back on a gold standard where currency is tethered to something of real value.
Yeah, the problem with the gold standard is if you talk to the people, and the one group that supported us are the people who used to control the gold. Because, you see, as far as they're concerned, the golden rule is he who has the gold makes the rules.
Yeah.
Well, that's not really a viable alternative to fiat money, if you ask me, okay?
True.
What I personally support is we need multiple different groups that have some kind of planning function, you know, into the future. And whatever they do has to be based on stuff that exists in the real world. There is a discipline in reality that you cannot escape. If you grow wheat, that wheat exists, and then you can put out a receipt saying, hey, this is good for wheat. But if you just put out a receipt that's backed by nothing, it doesn't exist. It's just a fact of nature.
Right.
And what I've supported is I came here when, you know, back in the 80s when Japan was #1 and it was the country of the future. And they had a system which I thought was the best we've seen so far on this planet. They had what was known as an economic planning agency. And they would draw up an idea of where we want this country to be 5 years from now, you know? And everybody would be consulted, and people would say, we want more roads, we want more sewers, we want more schools, we want to have a space station, whatever it was. And then they would draw up detailed plans. The Bank of Japan would go around and figure out how much money they could print that was backed by real stuff without causing inflation. And, you know, backed by real stuff, it means real estate, gold, rice, anything real. And then they would, private industry would actually carry it out. And what they had fast economic growth for decades, very fast, close to 10% a year. They had the lowest gap between the poor and the rich in any developed country, and probably any country on earth. And it was the Americans who came in and bullied them and forced them to dismantle that system, which was why they've had stagnation for the past 23 years. The Chinese are still using a system similar to the old Japanese system, which is why they still have fast economic growth.
Wow, okay.
So what I'm saying is that you need some people who are selected because they're very smart, because they passed a good exam, who are given the job of carrying out people's wishes in a realistic manner. And so everybody says this is what we want the world to be in 5 years, and then these guys try to make it real by you know, focusing on numbers and stuff that can actually be done. Now, I'm not saying we want a single planning agency for the whole planet. I'm saying this could be one of many competing groups trying to create new projects for the future.
Sure.
The CIA guys and these people I talked to, and the Rothschild faction that's helping us, they want their own new offshore centers where they could carry out their own plans and projects for the planet. And that's fine. I don't think we want a centralized, you know, control network. But we do need to make sure that anything that does exist is disciplined by reality. It has to be based in something real. Like, the system should be that if someone takes a log and carves it into a totem pole, they've created money.